Hey, I'm REM, and this is me learning to be a lavabender. Maybe. So, I'm taking part in the Foreign Nations Readathon. And basically, it's based on the TV show Avatar's Last Airbender. And your job is to try to become the Avatar. So, to do that, you have to read books. To read the books, you need prompts. To read the prompts, you need a guideline. So the guideline is that you have to complete all 4 nations. I started with Earth, and I'm currently still on Earth. To complete a nation, you have to complete 10 levels, and plus join 4 groups and complete, I believe it's 2 skills. So I am nearly finished with level 10. I've completed 2 of the groups, and I'm working on one of my skills, which is lava bending. Now, the reason I say maybe is because I'm kind of behind. My prompts for this are to read a 650-page book, to read a book that someone who's already has lava bending chose for me out of 10 books that I gave them a list of, and to read a book with lava in the cover or title. Now, I have the books all picked out, and I have started the one that is above 650 pages. The only problem is, it said on Goodreads that it was like 820 pages, and I was like, I'm okay with that. I downloaded it onto my Kindle app, and it is 941 pages. That's honestly quite the difference when you're talking about books this big. And it is currently July 21st. I started this book 2 days ago on the 19th, and I am now 282 pages in, which is totally not bad. Like, I would think that's actually pretty good for 3 days of reading. But it is, on the other hand... Anyways, what book did I pick for 650 plus pages? It turned out to be 941 pages. I picked out Rose, which is a short story collection edited by Gardner how do you say his name? And what does... Deswa, I think, by Gardner Deswa and George R. R. Martin. And I have read short story collections edited by both of them individually before and love them. So I was eager to read this one. And it's called Rogues because the idea is that the protagonist has to be a rogue. It can be fantasy, it can be mystery, it can be sci-fi, it can be romance. But the protagonist has to be a rogue. So let's go through the stories I've read so far and see what I thought of them. Okay, so I started with Tough Times All Over by Joe Abercrombie. I have not read Joe Abercrombie, or actually I have. I read like 1 chapter, maybe 1.5 of the Blade itself, and I DNF'd, and this was in the period when I was not DNFing. If you've watched my videos now, which I doubt you have, but if you have, I am DNFing right and left. However, I read this back when I was 16, and I was like getting into DNFing, but I still wasn't quite there. But it was just so violent for me that I DNF'd it. So I was really worried that Tough Times All Over was going to be super violent too, but it wasn't. It wasn't. It was. However, I don't really know how to feel about it. In the beginning, I was enjoying it. It's basically a story where we just have characters who are all chasing after this MacGuffin, but it just keeps getting passed from one to the other. And I did find it really fun for most of the story. However, it is like 50 pages, and it did get a little too long, in my opinion. Like, the concept is fun, but it should be just a short story. It shouldn't be getting into novelette length, you know? Then I read What Do You Do by Gillian Flynn, who I obviously very much know from Gone Girl, her famous novel, but I've never read anything she wrote. So I didn't really know what to expect in this. And I was overall pleasantly surprised. The humor was both fun and dark, and like really the humor, when I don't generally like humorous books, but like when the humor is going to be like immersed throughout the story like this one, this is what I like, that it's dark, it's tongue-in-cheek kind of. I like that. I also like that when we first got to the scary part, I was like really like shivering. Like there was a part that was like kind of setting us for a scary part, and that wasn't scary at all. And then we got the scary part, and I was like, and I was scared. And like, I just felt like, and also the change in that we had like so much humor up to that part, even in the setting up for the scary part, and then it was just like tension. However, the ending did feel a little weak to me. I felt it just I felt the story could have ended earlier with a slightly different ending, and I would have liked it a bit more. Then I read Bad Brass by Bradley Denton, and now I feel like we're getting to authors I haven't heard of. So did I not read this? Wait, oh my god. I got mixed up. I did not read Bad Brass by Bradley Denton. That's the story I haven't read yet. And then I read Bent Twig by Joe R. Lansdale. Now, I have never heard of Joe R. Lansdale, but I had a real good time with Bent Twig, and like, this doesn't mean I want to read Joe Lansdale's stories. They are definitely not my thing. Like, I would not enjoy reading a whole novel. I just found the story, part of the reason why I enjoy the story is that it's so not my thing, and it's like, oh, that's interesting. It's interesting to see what I like in here, what works for me, and what doesn't work for me. But yeah, definitely, definitely not planning to read more of Joe Lansdale's work. But I did like this, and I thought it was the setup. I thought it was plotted really, like, I just thought like the pacing and the plot worked so well together, and the pacing was so good, and the plot was just okay, but it just worked so well with the pacing. I can't explain this, but you could not have had the plot without the pacing, which is kind of crazy because like pacing is generally just something you say is a skill, but no, this one you could not have had the plot without the pacing. Okay. Oh, I knew I was missing something. Before Bentwig, I read The Inn of Seven Blessings by Matthew Hughes. I don't believe I've heard of Matthew Hughes before, but maybe the name does sound kind of familiar, but it's also a very common name, I believe. So, anyways, I also really like this one. I did feel like it was kind of missing some build-up. It was like nearly 40 pages, but I kind of did feel like I was being thrown into a world that was about characters that I hadn't known of. I did also feel like that in the Tough Times in the Joe Abercrombie story, but I think that might won't really be. And the Inn of Seven Blessings, I don't think that it's in like this world. I just kind of felt like there was some stuff that was just like not about world building actually, but about the characters and the characters' attitudes. It was just kind of like, okay. Okay, then I read Tawny Petticoats by Michael Swanwick. Again, never heard of Michael Swanwick. This one was very satisfying ending. A very satisfying ending. But the beginning and middle, I felt it was just like, okay, I didn't feel like I don't like this. I didn't feel like I like this. I did find the world really interesting. However, there was something that I found very annoying, almost on the verge of sexist. So, yeah. Okay, then I read Providence by David W. Ball, another person I've never heard of, and I did not like the story. It was not badly written, in that the prose was good. The prose, or was it good? The prose, it was not badly written, and the prose kept me hooked, despite the fact that this is one of the most badly set up stories I've ever read. It's so badly, it basically feels nearly like a history textbook. Like, I have read nonfiction history books that were written more engaging than this. And basically, it's just not what you want out of a story for it to sound like a nonfiction history. The ending was okay, but it was a twist ending, which, while I did expect what was going to happen, I still personally do not like twist endings. Plus, it still wasn't worth the rest of the story. Okay, and then the last one I read was Roaring Twenties by Carrie Vaughn. Now, I have heard of Carrie Vaughn. I've read some of her stories, and I was nervous going to this one because I haven't really liked her stories, and this one was not an exception. I was bored. I was bored reading this one. I don't know. It felt incredibly slow. It felt like there were too many things going on. It's a short story, and there were like multiple plot points. Like, let me think. There were 3 plot points plus like another B plot, or maybe it was 2 plot points plus 2 B plots, and the story is what, 35 pages? We don't need all that. Calm down. And also, I just found the prose boring. Anyways, the next one I have is A Year and a Day, An Old Thirdain by Scott Lynch. I've had The Lies of Locke Lamora on my TBR for since 2014. And I've heard mixed things about it, which has made me nervous to go into it. And because I was bored with the Carrie Vaughn story, and I've heard mixed things about Scott Lynch's writing, especially his treatment of female characters, I am nervous to go into A Year and a Day, An Old Thirdain. I do wish I knew a little more of what this is about. It's also 50 pages, so But on the other hand, it might give me a taste of Scott Lynch's writing now. I can be like, oh, am I really interested in The Lies of Locke Lamora, or am I not really interested in The Lies of Locke Lamora? Hello, it is July 25th, and another prompt, I have not finished Rogues yet, believe me, but another prompt I had for this was, for Lavabending, was I needed to give 10 books and have someone who already has completed Lavabending choose. So the ones I put were A Planet Named Sheol by Corey Winter Smith, Batman number 497, and The Forest of Sorrows by John Helfers, Freckle Juice by Judy Blume, Meet Kaya by Janet Wheeler Shaw, Vote for Suzanne by Nancy Krulik, Write On by Nancy Krulik, Rat and Fish Are Friends by Innocent Chizaram Ilo, and Jambula Tree by Monica Arak Dinieko, and finally, Pippi Longstocking by Astrid Lindgren. And Louise, who is Foxes and Fairy Tales, by the way, they have a YouTube channel as well. This is what she chose for me. Now, this is a reread. I didn't specify that, but this is a reread. I don't know how many times I've read this is a reread because I read it when I was a kid, as most people did. If you don't know, this book is about Pippi Longstocking. It was published in Sweden in 1945, and it's about Pippi Longstocking, who was a 9-year-old girl who lives alone. She has a pet monkey, and she's very strong, and everything that happens around her is crazy. Now, I've always had mixed feelings about this book, and they still haven't changed. Well, they have changed in some ways. I am actually more able to suspend my disbelief with this book and the fact that Pippi lives alone without any parents than I was able to as a child. But overall, besides that, they haven't changed. And I'm also more able to suspend my disbelief about the monkey, or rather clamp down on my emotions about you really shouldn't be having a monkey, that you're dressing in clothes and feeding all kinds of junk, but I'm more able to clamp down my emotions about it. So, on one hand, this is a very fun book. Pippi and her friends get into a lot of kooky adventures. There are some episodes, I don't think there's one chapter in here that didn't have something enjoyable in it. On the other hand, Pippi herself is kind of hard for me to understand. Besides the trouble I had with suspension of disbelief as a child, about her living alone as a 9-year-old and being happy to not have mother and father, or rather, being content with not having a mother and father. She isn't particularly happy about it, but she's not unhappy about it. So besides that, which I was able to get over while rereading as an adult, my main problem with Pippi is she smart or not? Or, what do her actions mean? At times, she seems to use her kooky behavior to be able to manipulate people and get what she wants, and at other times she seems to have absolutely no control over kooky behavior. So I didn't enjoy that. While it is a fun book, just switching between that it was honestly at some points it was like every other chapter, and I really just enjoyed the chapters more where she is just kind of kooky and she gets things done. There's one chapter in particular where she's kind of kooky, but she is able to be she's able to be a functional member of society. And that was the chapter I enjoyed most. And the other chapters that were like that just she's kind of having fun. The chapters where she's manipulating people are fun until there until I come across the chapters where she's just not able to control her behavior at all, and then I'm like, what is going on? Who is the real Pippi? So that's that's the other thing I want to say. I knew there was another thing I wanted to say, which is I just don't understand how this book got translated. Like, not in a bad way, just in that there are so many books like these that are about a silly character, and I am curious, just like, how did this one get so popular and to be translated into so many languages? It says here over 40 million books about Pippi have been sold worldwide. And while this isn't the only Pippi Longstocking book, I've read the whole series at some point. I'm not planning to continue, but like rereading it. I'm just like curious how exactly it just feels like luck of the draw to me, because I don't think this is such a good book that, oh my god, it needed to be picked up and translated. I think it was literally just luck of the draw. And I'm sorry if I'm being negative. I had a cute, fun time reading this, but I just found it okay, not like amazing. I think that's one of the reasons I've reread it so much, which also happened to me with some other books that have been very popular, where I've reread it and tried to understand, like, why is exactly this book the one that has become so popular when it's not a bad book, but there's nothing especially new here, and it's just, and the writing is just okay, like, the characters are just okay, and the world, like, everything's just okay. Hey, it is July 27th, and I've kind of come to the conclusion, let myself come to the conclusion that I'm not going to be able to finish Lavabending. Definitely if my book was shorter, because I'm at page 600. Perhaps if I were less busy. I have been very busy, and I'm going to continue to be busy until the end of July. What else? There was maybe if I was just more interested in the book. But again, I think it's really the busyness. It's fine. I am at page currently 603. So let me tell you about the stories I've read so far. I'm currently in the middle of the story. So I left you when I was about to read A Year and a Day in Old Theridane by Scott Lynch. And I found the story to just be okay. Now, look, I want to talk to you also about the fact that at some point, I got really exhausted. Like, I don't even know how long I hadn't slept in or really want to think about it, but that definitely probably influenced my reactions to the stories. Then the other thing I think that has been bothering me in this book is that a lot of these stories are just like, okay, and there's so many of them that are similar. So if I had read A Year and a Day in Old Theridane earlier in the book, I would have enjoyed it more than I had at the point when I read it. Now, it was okay, it was fine, it had some humor, it had shenanigans, but I just found it to be okay. Okay. I mean, and it hasn't really changed my mind on Rivers of London in any way. It wasn't misogynistic, I'll say. There wasn't any sex with them. Then I read Bad Brass by Bradley Dixon. This was, again, I just found it to be okay. In this one, it was more divided, and that I did it took me a long time to warm up to the main character, but that was for a good reason. Like, that's what the author wanted. So it took me a long time to warm up to the main character. But on the other hand, I found the plot to end up being very convoluted. The way we got to the ending was convoluted. So I enjoyed the fact that I had to warm up to the main character, but I didn't like the ending. Then I read Heavy Metal by Sherry Priest. This one was alright. And again, if this one I had just read earlier in the book, I think I would have liked it a lot more. I think I was just, like, tired of reading. Though, however, and also I was just tired when I read this. However, it's a horror story, which was different. There weren't any horror stories so far in the book, so I did like that. I liked our main character. He is quite the character. I will say it was too Christian for me. No matter at what point had I read it, I think that was actually the main detriment, not the tiredness. No matter at what point had I read it, it was just too Christian to me, to the point where I lost my understanding of the story. Now, that's not a detriment of the story itself. That's just the fact that I didn't grow up with, like, any knowledge of Christianity. So I can't condemn the story, but I think I would like to read more stuff by Terry Priest, you know? I just didn't really understand the ending, which is not the whole story. Then I read The Meaning of Love by Daniel Abraham. This one was too long. I quite enjoyed it for a while, and then it just became too long. We're just going on for too long. We're going over the same things over and over. Okay. Then I read A Better Way to Die by Paul Cornell. And this one was the one where I was like really losing it. Like, do I hate like everything in this book? Like at this point, or not even hate, just am I bored by everything in this book at this point? Because oh my god, the story was so boring. Now, another complaint that I am going to say about this book in total, is that there are a lot of stories which are connected to larger worlds that the authors wrote. And it's okay to read one or two stories like that, but there's at a point where it's like, you know, you're missing stuff. And this story in particular was so many things that just threw into the world building, and it's just a short story. And you're like, and you know you're missing stuff, and you know that they threw you into the world building. You're just like, oh my god, just let me read a short story that is a standalone. They're not missing stuff. This one was also just not well written, in my opinion. It was super boring. Okay, then I read Ilsing and Tyre by Stephen Saylor, and this one I hated. I hadn't hated any stories in this book. This one I hated because our main character is sexually assault someone, and we just la-di-da away from there. Like, it seemed as a cute, funny teenager thing. But no, he sexually assaults someone. Okay, then I read A Cargo of Ivories by Garth Nix, and I was disappointed. I love Garth Nix's books that I've read, and I like the short stories, not as much as I've loved his books, but I have liked the short stories, and this is the worst thing I've read by Garth Nix. And you know, when you love someone's stuff, it doesn't mean that's the worst thing ever. Like, this is definitely not a bad story. It just wasn't the level I expected of Garth Nix. There were just a bit too many coincidences. It was okay, but it wasn't what I expected from Garth Nix. Okay, now I'm in the middle of the story. Diamonds from Tequila by Walter Dunn Williams. I'm about right halfway through. It actually starts on page like 572 and ends on page 632. And like I said, I'm on page 603. So I'm halfway through it. And I was not liking this at first. And then it just got interesting. One thing I will say, it's not fantasy. It is totally realistic thriller drug stuff. Okay, not totally. There is some science fiction stuff in this, but it's really more a thriller than science fiction. And that is probably impacting my enjoyment, just because so many of these stories were speculative, which the thing is, I went into that knowing that, and I was thinking, oh, that could be a problem. But I read other large collections that were edited by George R. R. Martin or whatever the other guy's name is, and I enjoyed them, despite the fact that they were old science fiction or old fantasy. So why the fact that everything in here is speculative? I think it's also just because the stories aren't that great, or maybe I just don't love the idea of rogues as much as I thought I did. And the one about dragons I absolutely loved. Or maybe there's just actually more different stuff to do with dragons, because rogues are a character in and of themselves, but dragons are kind of like part of the setting. So that forces you kind of to change the setting if you think, oh, I should do something interesting when I know I'm going to be part of a giant collection about dragons. I do also think that they chose worse. Like, they were just choosing authors they liked, and I mentioned the thing about people just writing in their worlds that they'd already established that I don't like. So I need to tell you that I did complete the Lavabender in the end. I did DNF it, but they said it was okay to DNF. And I did actually end up reading one last story that was not connected to any other worlds. I cannot remember who it was by, and I already gave the book back, but it was actually my favorite story in the whole collection. an early Edwardian era, I think, or very late Victorian era mystery with magical realism, kind of. And I just thought it was so good. The characters were very well done. And while we were kind of thrown in the middle, because it wasn't part of a different world, it was explained well enough that I could understand what was going on without feeling like I was missing anything. And ironically, I wouldn't mind reading more stories in that same world. Then, I had to read a book with lava on the cover. So for that, I started to read Lay and the Fire Goddess by, I'll tell you who it's by in a second. But this is a Rick Riordan Presents book. So that means that it's basically a series where a kid encounters their own mythology and ends up going on quests and stuff. And this one sounded really good. However, it's not. So this was by Malia Mauna Kea. And there are a few reasons why it's not. First of all, the premise is kind of off. And by off, I mean the summary. The summary doesn't actually tell you what the premise is. So the real premise is, we have our main character, Anna, whose Hawaiian name is Leilani. And every summer she goes to spend 3 weeks with her grandma in Hawaii. And her grandma has designated her as like the family's historian. So she has to remember all these stories. And she has now turned 12, which is important in Hawaiian culture. I did not get deep enough into this book to figure out why exactly it's important. She is being teased by her friends, but, well, not by her friends, by her classmates back in Colorado for being Hawaiian and believing in these myths. So she is very angry that she has to do this stuff and can't just do normal tourist stuff. Now, that's part of the reason I didn't like it. I am sick and tired of these books being like, oh, this character is so disconnected from their culture and they have to figure out how to be part of their culture. And I get that it's something that happens, but why do they always have to be so disconnected? And that actually comes to another complaint, which is actually a complaint that's not just about me, but actually about the stuff that happens inside the book. And that is, it just does not make sense. According to the book, Anna has been coming to the island every summer since she was like 5. And she lived there as a kid before she was 5 as well. And she's been hearing these stories all her life from her grandma mainly, but also from her father. And up until like this year or last year, she loved hearing them. And now suddenly she can't remember any of them. Like whenever anything plot relevant happens and she has to remember a story, she's like, oh, I don't know. And which is annoying because like that doesn't even make sense. Which brings me to another thing I don't like, which has actually happened in quite a few of the Rick Riordan Presents books, where our character doesn't know what's going on, right? Because they need to not know fully what's going on in order for us to get an explanation of what's going on. And so what happens in this book, and what happened in a few other series that I DNF the first books of too, is that there's another character who doesn't know what's going on, and basically the character asks questions, and the other character answers, and this book was I think, the most boring example, where they're literally just walking up a path for hours. And they talk, and they're like, well, this is what's going on, this is this story. And literally like, remember this Pele story, remember this Pele story, Pele is the goddess, the fire goddess, remember this Pele story, oh, look, and her companion is a bat, so the bat goes off to catch some insects. That was so boring. So yes, I DNF'd this book. I did not like it. If you want to read a Rick Riordan Present books, go read the Arusha series. They are so good. They do not know this. Our main character is not disconnected from her culture, and despite that, she does not know everything, but it's not told in a boring way. I was kind of thinking about why is it that Percy Jackson and Arusha don't tell this stuff in a boring way, because it seems to be a pitfall that a lot of these authors do fall into. And I think the thing is that in Percy Jackson and Arusha, they're thrown into the adventures, and explanations happen kind of like during, like the one scene in in Percy Jackson where it's like, oh, this seems familiar, right? Which a lot of authors do, but they don't. But then he's like, oh, I don't know what this is. And then he gets in and discovers it's Medusa, but it's built up very carefully, so we don't know it's Medusa until he gets in. And there's a bunch of stuff like that where they're already in the adventures. They're not being told beforehand. So then I still needed a book that had lava on the cover or lava in the title, so I decided to go for a nonfiction picture book. And the one I chose was by Melvin Berker and Gilda Berker, and that was Why Do Volcanoes Blow Their Top? Questions and Answers About Volcanoes and Earthquakes. So I think this was a fine. I think it managed to answer in a pretty short amount of space a lot of questions about volcanoes and earthquakes and made it very clear how they're connected, and the questions were also connected. It was very logical how the questions progressed. The one thing I didn't like is that the photos weren't always connected to what they were talking about. Like, would be talking about one volcano, and then there would be a photo of a different volcano. But anyways, that is everything I read for lava bending. I am now a lava bender. So let's go over what I read. Obviously, the worst one I did not like at all. Well, actually, that's difficult to say. Like, I DNF'd the Rogues, but there were things I liked about it. I think all of the books I read for this, besides Land the Fire Goddess, which I did not like at all, really, and that one also doesn't count because I DNF'd it before 50%. I think they were all middling. Like, I can't really say that Rogues was worse than the Pippi Longstocking or Why Do Volcanoes Blow Their Tops. Partially because they're so different, but also partially because there were some things, like, I really liked that last story I read of Rogues, and there were other stories I enjoyed, and then there were so many stories I didn't. So yeah, I'm not going to rank them. That's all.